Education Freedom Tax Credit, income tax signed into law in the state of Washington, and Congressional Perks Explainer here on the Center Square Daily. Today is Tuesday, March 31st. I'm your host, Esther Wickham, standing in for Greg Bishop. Looking at education, one of the biggest forces shaping the school choice debate right now is federal tax credits. Right now, 27 states have signaled intent to opt in, while states in gray areas are in opposition or have not made the decision to opt in. This new federal program allows taxpayers to claim up to $1,700 for donating to scholarship organizations that help fund tutoring, books, classes, and other educational needs for students either in public, private, and homeschooling settings. Now looking specifically at some states, whether they're opting in or whether they're in opposition. First, out of the state of Colorado, a new study suggests this could have massive impact, potentially generating up to $657 million each year for students and schools across the states. Some of the benefits for Colorado from Education Freedom Tax Credit, according to estimates by Common Sense Institute. We see here 5 to 15% of participation generates millions of dollars. We have over 8,000 new jobs, over $5 billion in gross domestic product growth, and 36,000 more students could attend schools of their choice. Now, at the same time, this new school choice initiative is going to have some pushback. It's going to have some critics. And the main voice that we see critics are saying is that this is limited oversight and there are accountability risks. Now, we have Colorado State Representative Eliza Hamrick, who is a Democrat, saying that the Colorado tax subsidized funds will be funneled through private middlemen who are not required to undergo independent financial audits or report a single data point on school academic progress. Furthermore, because out-of-state organizations can distribute these funds, Colorado is essentially surrendering its fiscal oversight to unregulated private entities in our state and far beyond our state's reach. So the big worry and the big question is, where are these programs and these initiatives being held accountable at the state level and also at the federal level? Now, moving from Colorado, let's look at some other states that have some concerns. Looking at the state of Wisconsin, we have Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers recently vetoed a bill to join a federal tax credit scholarship program, arguing similarly to Representative Hamrick that it's diverting public funds to private schools, while supporters of federal tax credits in the state of Washington say it simply allows voluntary taxpayer donations that could in turn benefit both private and public education. Finally, out of the state of Illinois, we have Illinois Representative Reagan Deering is urging the state to opt in to federal tax credit scholarship programs, arguing it would direct funding education to Illinois families without raising taxes, while warning that if we fail to bring in these programs and these initiatives, we are going to have less benefits for students and potentially taxes could be raised. Now, the big question is whether Governor J.B. Pritzker is going to be in support of this. He has until January 1st of 2027 to signal whether the state of Illinois is going to participate in this federal program. But he has signaled time and time again that he is possibly going to be in opposition to a federal tax credit scholarship program over concerns that it could fund schools with harmful values. Now, the Center Square reported that, he has said the tax incentives could support schools that, quote, teach values that are racist, anti-Semitic, or anti-American. We'll continue to follow this story and other education-related stories like this, and you can follow that at thecentersquare.com, and we can see what exactly these federal tax credit programs mean for families and the future of public education. Now hopping over to the state of Washington, Governor Bob Ferguson signed a new 9.9% income tax on high earners into law recently, which is projected to raise about $3.5 billion annually for public services like education, healthcare. But opponents are preparing a legal challenge and potential ballot initiative arguing the tax violates the state constitution. Here to explain a little bit more about it, we have the Center Square's reporter, Carleen Johnson. Carleen, thanks so much for joining me today. First off, could you kind of break down exactly who will be affected by this tax and how many taxpayers kind of fall into this category that Governor Bob Ferguson recently signed?
Yeah, the income tax is couched by supporters as a millionaires tax. So income above $1 million annually or combined household income of $1 million or more is taxed at that 9.9% rate. So if you make 1.2 million a year, that $200,000 is going to be taxed at 9.9%. The problem with this, even though it's couched as only a tax on the very wealthy, right, by supporters, is all the pass-through organizations. So if you've got a small business that, say you have a good year and maybe make $1 million or more that year, your organization, your business is going to be subject to this tax. And so groups like the Association of Washington Business said, hey, wait a minute, this is not just a tax on the wealthy, this is a tax on business. So that's been one of the main criticisms. And as you mentioned, Esther, already we have this legal challenge that's going to be filed in court later this week. We did speak with Citizen Action Defense Fund and their executive director, Jackson Maynard, who, told me just outside the bill signing yesterday, they're not waiting. They believe there are big time constitutional issues here.
And we do have a clip of you talking with Jackson Maynard specifically about the concerns they have for the taxpayer.
What's in store is that we have hired Rob McKenna to file a lawsuit. That lawsuit will be filed within days, and we will be challenging this unconstitutional income tax that the governor just signed into law. As Rob outlined in his memo that was given to the legislature that was unfortunately ignored by the legislature and the governor, the state constitution has a uniformity requirement for any taxes on property, as well as a cap on 1%. This clearly violates that.
Now, from what you've seen in talking with Jackson Maynard, what are the strongest legal arguments that opponents are making for the constitutionality of this income tax and potentially the impact it's going to have on taxpayers?
Right. The Washington State Constitution says, it defines your income as property. And so it would have to be a uniform rate. If you're going to put an income tax on millionaires, you got to put it on everybody. It has to be taxed. That's the uniformity clause in our state constitution. So that's what challengers believe is their biggest argument. And in fact, the Washington State Supreme Court has multiple times said that you can't do it this way. You'd have to have a constitutional amendment. And in the past, when voters have been asked if they want to amend the Constitution to, allow an income tax, they've rejected it multiple times. So voters have said you can't do this. The Washington State Supreme Court in the past has said that you can't do it. The issue now is we have a very liberal makeup of justices at the Washington State Supreme Court. So majority Democrats felt that the timing was ripe right now to go ahead and push this through. They think they're going to have a favorable ruling at the state Supreme Court.
Yeah. And in your interview with Maynard, he had a little bit more to say about that impact of taxpayers, like you've explained.
There's a lot of fear about this tax that's justified not only from the people, the businesses and the business owners that are in the process of moving from the state, but also for just people in the state who are concerned that this is not going to just be limited to the folks identified in the bill, but this is going to become a statewide income tax.
So as he said, it's going to have this impact of where do we draw the line? Where is the limit? And just like you said, explain a little bit more from what you saw in your reporting on next steps, right? What is likely going to come out of the courts? Will they block it, overturn the law? And I know that it's been signed into law, but is, going to take some time to be taken into effect? What are we going to start seeing in the next couple of days and weeks, Carleen?
Right. So they attach an emergency clause, which makes this thing referendum proof. But Brian Haywood and Let's Go Washington, they've already filed a referendum. I'm actually going to be having a conversation with him later today because I'm curious to find out why go this route when you know you can't do the referendum. Why not just launch the initiative campaign? I think full well the intention is to go the initiative route. They're going to have a short window to do that because they'll have to go to the Secretary of State, get a title for the initiative, and then go out and start gathering signatures of voters. Based on public opinion that I've seen so far, Esther, they're not going to have any problem getting more than enough people to sign these petitions to then put something on the ballot this year, most likely this year. And why this year? Why rush it this year when you've got that short window? Because it's, I think, the first week of July when they'd have to turn those into the Secretary of State. I've been told the reason why is they fully expect majority Democrats to come back in the 2027 legislative session, again, trying the initiative killer bill. They pushed that through this year, ended up not ultimately passing because there was so much public opposition, but that's going to make it more difficult to get an initiative out before people. So they think if they wait until 2027, the initiative killer bill's probably going to get pushed through because they want to make sure that they make it more difficult to mount an initiative effort next year. So they're going to put that through this year. We're going to get a lot more information on this in the days to come. So I welcome an opportunity to come back and share again on your show to discuss this. This is got a lot of opposition here in the state of Washington, and I think public opinion is going to push this thing, probably the initiative, I should say, push this thing onto the ballot. I would be surprised, actually, if it doesn't get approved, the repeal.
Right. Yeah. And as you said, has been a lot of opposition to this with the question of constitutionality. And it seems that even though Governor Ferguson has emphasized, right, that this could potentially generate over, was it $3.5 billion in public services, that doesn't seem to be wavering to those in opposition, saying, no, that actually is going to impact the taxpayer anymore. Did they have any response to that amount of money that's going to potentially go to education or healthcare if this follows through?
Well, that's what's interesting is because in the bill, it expressly says, okay, we're going to expand the working families tax credit. So you get checks that go back to taxpayers, right? If you're lower, moderate income. Many of us might get a check in the mail. Is that going to convince people that, wow, this is great? Others say this is simply a redistribution of wealth. We're going to take this $3.5 billion a year roughly and redistribute it to folks, give some smaller businesses some tax breaks, expand the working families tax credit, maybe some for healthcare, maybe some for education. But ultimately, the impacts to business and whether this leads to mass capital flight, we're going to find out. Now, I should mention the estate tax, the death tax in the state of Washington, they increased that to 35% just last legislative session. Well, because they started finding out that a whole bunch of wealthy people were indeed leaving before they die here and have to give the state 35% of their estate, they repealed that. They repealed that this year. It was an acknowledgement that basically the wealthy are going to leave if you increase the taxes. Well, we just did that with the income tax. So whether or not we're going to see mass exodus of the wealthy, or perhaps the next Microsoft, Starbucks, Google, they're not going to locate here because of this, this income tax. So we haven't yet seen what those impacts are going to be. We've got lots of people saying it's not a good idea, but it's signed into law.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what the ballot initiative has to say, and the outcome of that will be following that. Carleen, thank you so much for joining us today. For those interested in following more of what's happening in the state of Washington, you can go to thecentersquare.com as well as watch Carleen Johnson report in Washington in Focus on our YouTube channel. Now looking over to the Center Square's investigative team. Our investigative team recently examined congressional expenses that paid with taxpayer dollars in this explainer video. Take a look.
Office expenditures have gone up 40 to 50% in the last 4 or 5 years.
Spending in the U.S. Senate from their office accounts has skyrocketed in the past few years by more than 40%.
That is a significant jump, significant increase in expenditures, and it seemingly goes unchecked.
The Center Square dug through Senate spending records and found private jet travel, poorly defined or questionable staff positions like a chaplain, framers, phone operators, and doorkeepers, and large reimbursements to themselves.
We're writing a story about Senate spending the last 4 or 5 years and how it's gone up 40 to 50%. I've noticed that you take a number of flights from D.C. to Eden Prairie, Minnesota, rather than direct.
If you can't get rid of frivolous spending like private jets, trips, you are not going to be able to address the big issues like entitlement spending. $1 million a year is really a lot of money to spend on private travel. And this is something that really resonates with people and taxpayers and citizens when they see this, and if they're able to see it.
South Dakota Republican Senator Mike Rounds topped the list of private jet flyers, followed closely by New York's 2 Democrats, Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand.
And the Senate doesn't need to spend this money. They don't need to spend taxpayer money. If they want to take a private jet, they can pay for it themselves. And they should have to justify each and every trip.
On our side, we kind of look to see where we sit among all of them. We're normally giving back more money out of our budget than about 50% of all the members of the Senate.
There needs to be a total reevaluation of all expenses within the Senate, even the chaplain. Because we're talking about an office that has multiple people making 6-figure salaries, and there has to be some common sense here. And we're not saying get rid of the chaplain's office, but this has to be downsized. You don't need a PR person. You don't need a chief of staff.
And some senators reimburse themselves thousands of dollars, raising questions about whether that could allow them to get inappropriate expenses approved or keep credit card points and cash back.
This is very problematic, and it's not something that I knew about. And there is less of a paper trail, there's less transparency, and there's so much temptation to inflate the numbers and to give yourself a little extra more when you're writing that check. And this should be outlawed immediately. There is no reason that members should be writing themselves a check for expenses.
Most of the senators refused to discuss their spending, and Senate records were tougher to analyze because they were in PDFs instead of spreadsheets.
We sent our DC reporter up to the Capitol for a week to try to talk to them in person, and they either fled or brushed them off.
If you're a member of Congress and you are seeking the spotlight about a piece of legislation or going after your political enemy, guess what? You also have to answer the tough questions, and the questions of travel and spending thousands of dollars when you could have only spent hundreds of dollars.
Senator Mitch McConnell was the top Republican during the 43% increase in spending and chairs the committee that oversees Senate office accounts.
Any comment on that at all?
If you would like to read more of these stories, you can find the articles linked in the description below or on our website at thecentersquare.com. And if you'd like to find more explainer videos like this, you can go to our YouTube channel at The Center Square. Well, from my studio here in Southern California, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Esther Wickham. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back on Wednesday to look at more stories that impact you, the taxpayer, here on the Center Square Daily.